Mark Rogers TV going to the Big Ten to set up one of the prime matchups for this Saturday night. It's Michigan State traveling to South Bend to take on the Irish. We bring in Dominick, Garrett from the Only Colors. Dominick, we appreciate you stopping by for your first appearance here on Mark Rogers TV.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. Really glad to be able to jump in. Exciting week coming up, so I'm excited to talk about the game.
Yeah, this is one of the ones I always have to watch, because Michigan State, Notre Dame, if you're a purist, if you love the tradition of college football, this has been one that's typically on the docket and has been for a number of years, going back, of course, to that classic 1966 game. So let's set up Michigan State with a one game against Furman in the books. Tyler OConnor threw 18 passes in the game. Obviously, he brings a different dynamic to the quarterbacking position than Connor Cook did last year. Just your thoughts about OConnor approaching maybe the biggest game certainly to date, although he played substantially in the Ohio State game last year.
We weren't really sure going into camp, I guess, if you really want to back it up, like who was going to end up filling in that role for Connor Cook. And there was that thought of Damian Terry, who, if you're a Michigan State fan, you've heard Damian Terry's name for quite a long time, going back to before Connor even had the job. Terry was one of those guys that was coming in. I remember catching him in a first spring game, and we thought that we were going to have one of those dual threat quarterbacks, and that's what he was billed as, and that's what everybody really hyped him up at. But O'Connor just really, throughout camp, showed a lot of really great leadership, going all the way back to that Ohio State game when Connor Cook was injured last year. And he really stepped up quite a bit. Anybody that watched the Big Ten Network, there's the Green and White Days going on right now, and this behind the scenes, hard knock style of Michigan State camp. And, I have been incredibly impressed with Tyler OConnor. There was a lot of storylines last year about Connor Cook not being named a captain, and, a few too many stories for my liking about that. But, OConnor really has stepped up. He's really leading the team on offense. And, his first debut starting against Furman, he certainly didn't light the world on fire. But, you take a look at his stat line. He is 13 for 18. He had 190 yards and 3 touchdowns. O'Connor is a quarterback that's never going to be – he does not have the arm talent that a Connor Cook has, or even really a Kirk Cousins had. But he definitely has the ability to move the ball down the field. One thing that going back and looking at the tape, because I've watched it a couple of times, when Michigan State had the bye this week, I had to kill time somehow. And, when I was flipping through the other games, I watched. And the one area that O'Connor needs to work on a lot is his reading through his progressions and not staring down receivers. There was a couple of times he did have one interception. It was a great interception by Furman, not taking that away from them at all. But, the ability to look off coverage. There was 2 or 3 passes broken up by Furman, one of which totally would have been a pick 6 if it would have been against a quality opponent like a Notre Dame. They don't drop interceptions like that. So, O'Connor definitely has the skills that are there. He just needs to work on not getting lazy with his eyes and using that as another opportunity to be able to look off coverages to push the ball downfield.
I'm going to take us back here real quick, Dominick, to 2011. You had that 7-6 team, and if there was a disappointing unit on the team, it was wide receiver. So you had collected a number of recruits, and they were dropping passes all over the place. And that started to carry into 2012, and Mark Antonio really called those guys out. And they somehow started catching the football as a collective group, but nobody stood out like Aaron Burbridge, who really took off and became a star in college football, who's moved on now to the NFL. Now there seems to be a gap in terms of wide receiver production, and really that guy that Connor Cook, at least the last couple of years, had him to look to bail him out at times. Anybody in this wide receiver core that gives you some hope that could really be that kind of player?
Yeah, definitely. The interesting thing about that 2012 group, none of them really were breakout stars, but we actually just put up a piece on the website the other day. The top 7 receivers from 2012 were all playing in the NFL in week 1. 2 of them ended up making the move over to defense, and Le'Veon Bell was our number 5 receiver that year with 32 receptions. But Burbridge left a big gap. He was what I would say arguably, one of the top 2, maybe the top receiver in the Big Ten last year. And his relationship with Connor Cook was fantastic. You know, there was many times I was like, how in the world does this guy already have 8 catches for 120 yards in this game? The elder statesman is Felton Davis III. You know, he has the ability to, you know, him and RJ Sheldon really have the ability to have that rapport built with Tyler O'Connor. Neither of them are really big body running backs, so I don't have a lot of faith they're going to be able to do exactly what Burbridge did. One person I'm excited to see step up is Monty Medeiros. He had 5 catches in the game against Furman. You know, 5 catches for 85 yards, a 31-yard catch that was kind of like a bubble screen, but it ended up, you know, being able to be broke for more, you know, one of those big plays that we were desperately needing last year. But he is a big-bodied receiver, and up until this point, you know, he hasn't been a focus of the Michigan State offense at all. He nearly doubled his entire career catches just in the game against Furman. But he definitely fits the body type to be able to be that guy. Of course, you do have the tight end, Josiah Price. I called Josiah Connor Cook's release valve for the last 2 years. He really has done a fantastic job of being that Michigan State tight end, the type that can block very well, really seal the edges. But then also when he gets out and open, you know, he has a little bit of Gronkowski-esque to him. Not nearly that level of athleticism, but he has the ability to catch the ball. He has great hands, and when you get him in open space, he really can knock some guys down. And then one guy that I really want to pay attention to is Donnie Corley, freshman, who's just coming onto the squad this year. I think that out of camp, he seemed like the most exciting freshman. There was very talented freshmen that were coming in to camp, and Donnie Corley, I think, has the ability to be one of those next great Michigan State receivers that if he does stay for a couple of years and you know, we get some solid quarterback play for the next few seasons, he could be playing on Sundays for sure.
So my memory misfired there. 2011 was the team that won 10 games, beat Georgia in the bowl game, and then 2012 was the down year, 7-6, and then he came back obviously and won the Rose Bowl, and that was the wide receiver year that I remember, all the drop passes in 2012.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't pretty. There was a lot of frustration from Michigan State fans of the amount of drop passes that year.
Yes, that was the Connor Cook emergence against TCU, the game-winning drive, the field goal at the gun. All right, on defense, I think, Dominic, sometimes we slip as college football fans into stereotypes. So we know what Stanford gives us, we know what Michigan State gives us. We from year to year, and we just assume that the team's going to look the same. So on defense, it's lockdown corners. It's a linebacking core that's maybe not high on talent, but they know their assignments. They're going to make the plays. They're tough. They're grinders, and then great defensive ends that get to the quarterback, Shalik Calhoun mold kind of guys. Look at the defense versus what we expect to see in Deshaun Kaiser as the starting quarterback for Notre Dame, who's going to see most of the snaps, we assume, and your feelings about that matchup.
I think that it's going to be everybody knows this. It's the biggest test that Michigan State has. It's a very, very, looking at the way that Kaiser was able to really just slice up the Texas defense. Now, obviously, Texas ended up winning that game, in the second overtime. Just a fantastic first weekend of college football there. But the Kaiser did a really great job through the air. Those passes were not, wide open receivers. He really looked off coverage and he took advantage of corners that were not paying attention or were stuck with their back to the quarterback. As far as Michigan State goes, there is one glaring problem in the secondary, and that's our boy Damon Hicks. Darian Hicks. I'm sorry, Darian Hicks. He is that corner that always seems to frustrate the fans in the fact that he uses face guarding as a crutch. Face guarding is obviously something you could do in the college game. You don't really see it in the pros, but issues that we have had against Notre Dame in the past have definitely been where we have one weakness in the corners, and that weakness is constantly picked on. And it is very apparent that Darian Hicks is that. Having Demetrius Kantz and Monte Nicholson back at safety, both of them have really stepped up. Cox is actually one of the 3 team captains this year. And against Furman, I was really impressed with their play. Monte Nicholson did drop 1 interception. Would have been really nice to be able to have that just to get some confidence for the secondary. Vontae Copeland, he was injured for a good portion of last year. There was a merry-go-round of injuries Michigan State had. But as far as that goes, I think that Hicks he needs to step up his game because they are going to target him. And, he might be able to hide against a Furman or against, a lower opponent, but that's going to be really tough for him on the secondary for sure.
When you cover some of that, Dominic, about issues in the secondary, I'm just guessing that the look on your face has flashbacks to 2013 in South Bend when maybe a few pass interference calls should have been called and others should not have been called, and maybe your team goes undefeated and plays in the national championship game that year.
Yeah, I have flashbacks constantly when I'm thinking about that. And, there was a couple of pass interference calls that ended up keeping Notre Dame in that game against Texas that, and a couple of touchdowns as well that I saw. And I just picturing Hicks with his back to the ball and just trying to throw his hands up. And yeah, that game definitely makes me lose some sleep at night. But I think that overall, the secondary is incredibly talented. I mean, Mark D'Antonio said it in a press conference earlier during camp that he believes that the talent is there to be just as good as the no-fly zone was. They haven't stepped up to that by any stretch of the imagination. I actually got kind of torn apart by some people after the Furman game because I went on to our podcast for the site, and I was talking about how I think that they have that talent. The confidence just isn't there for me, especially after watching Furman. Furman, we didn't give them a lot of yards in the air by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't the confidence builder, especially after watching the way that Kaiser played, not only against Texas, but against Nevada. It's going to be tough through the air.
Hey, Dominic, I hate to circle back on you, but I want to catch this offensive line, and with no Jack Allen and Conklin from last year's team that was dominant up front and 2 of the very best in the business that have moved on to the NFL. Just wanted to get your thoughts along the offensive line because I saw the Furman game and you didn't push around that kind of opponent like most people would expect a Michigan State offensive line to do.
Yeah, it wasn't we didn't really force our will on their defense. Tyler O'Connor definitely had time in the pocket. And if you take a look at a couple of the drives that we did have, the first one, LJ Scott, he averaged 8.4 yards per carry on that first drive and ended up getting, a touchdown in under 4 minutes. So the line itself can create that space. And against a team like Notre Dame, when I was watching, they have their bodies are just a lot bigger on their defensive line than Furman's were. So when you don't have an incredibly experienced quarterback, you need to be able to fill some of those gaps. And, when we have Brandon Clemens, for instance, who just was granted his 6th year of eligibility, and he comes back and brings a lot of wisdom there. You have Cody Keeler, you have Brian Allen, Benny McGowan. There is a good deal of experience on the line, just not all of them actually working together. I was talking about the round robin of injuries that we had in the secondary last year. Offensive line was just insane. The fact that we were able to make it to the college football playoff with the line and all of the different, the filling in that we had to have there was quite insane. But, with Miguel Machado, Dennis Finley, David Beadle, Colt Schuins, there is a lot of talent that's on the offensive line. I think what it just takes for them is to start feeling more comfortable with each other. They have not had a lot of game time snaps, a lot of that full speed. And that's anytime you lose a Jack Conklin, there's a reason he went in the first round of the NFL draft. He was an incredible talent and just epitomized everything about a Michigan State offensive lineman. And, having that, obviously, the line is not going to be as good. But I think that our backs are a little bit more talented this year at, being able to find, even if it is a little bit of a smaller hole. And as long as health is not an issue, I think that if it's not against Notre Dame by week 4 or 5, this line will be pushing some people around and giving O'Connor plenty of time back there.
It's Michigan State at Notre Dame on Saturday night. A must-see game on a weekend of must-see games in college football. The Irish sit at about a 7.5-point favorite, according to Vegas. Dominick Garrett from The Only Colors, SB Nation's platform for Michigan State athletics, joining us. Dominick, we appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.